Another very busy week in geopolitics where Israel and Iran have gone to war. In America, we've seen an assassination of senior American politicians. And this week, the G7 comes together, where world leaders will try and come to some resolution to some of the events that are taking place across the globe, which seem to have put the whole of the world in crisis. Welcome to the latest Downtown Den Politics podcast.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
So welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics podcast. Part 2 this week, of course. We've started to feature our geopolitical discussion on Tuesdays, so it's great that you're back with us today. Hope you enjoyed yesterday's episode where we look back at Rachel Reeves' spending review, amongst other things. And I'm joined once again today by Kevin Johnson, our man in Birmingham, Urban Comms head honcho, of course, and Joe Phillips, who needs no introduction, the doyen of political thinking and a fabulous, fabulous contributor to the wonderful Nigel Farage's programme on Chicago. So let's start. Can you be a doyen or are you a doyeness? I'm not sure. Anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on, Frank.
Because we've got some very, sadly, serious things to discuss when it comes to geopolitics, not least the Israeli-Iran conflict and the attack that was made by Israel last week. And Netanyahu's claim is that this was because Iran were going full steam ahead to create nuclear weapons, despite the fact that they were due to have peace talks over the weekend. Those talks, of course, were suspended on the back of the Israel attack, and Iran, unsurprisingly, have come back with a blistering attack of their own on Israel. And whenever we're talking about these things, we talk about the political implications. Of course we do, because it's a political podcast, but we always have to remember that there are many, many victims in these conflicts, civilians, including children, of course, which is a tragedy. So, Joe, I know that you take a keen interest in Middle East politics. You've been over to that part of the world during your previous time as political advisor. I just wanted to get your take on where you think we're up to. And of course, we're recording this at a time when the situation is moving minute by minute, so we may be behind the curve, but just give me your reflections initially on that reasoning behind the Israel attack and whether you buy Netanyahu's take that Iran were about to develop a nuclear bomb.
Well, I absolutely don't buy that at all. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that it happened just a matter of hours, days after sanctions were imposed on two very, very right-wing members of his government, including by Britain, following on to Canada and France and some other countries as well, which was hugely criticised by Netanyahu and hugely criticised by Trump. And there is, I suppose, the cynic in me thinks, well, Netanyahu's not doing terribly well, is he, at home? 70% of Israelis don't support what he's doing and the genocide and horror that's being wrought on the Palestinians. So I know, let's create something. Let's look over here. It's sleight of hand, isn't it? So let's create another threat, because then I'm the only guy that can save you. And I think that is what's so terrible and what's frightening about all of this, is that you've got Netanyahu clinging on to power, and the only way he can stay in office is being supported by these very right-wing extremists, and who absolutely want the extermination of the Palestinian people and the no chance of a two-state solution and complete clearance of the Gaza Strip. You've got Iran, you've got the Ayatollah there, who is really hardline fundamentalist, and there is no doubt that there are many people in Iran who would like to see him gone and his regime, but not necessarily if that's at the hands of the Israelis. You've got Trump apparently not knowing anything about it. But what I find curious is that one of the stories that the Israelis put out, they said, "Oh, this is a fantastic operation, weeks, months of planning, Mossad agents inside Iran doing this, that, and the other." I think, what, these are the same people who didn't actually spot that Hamas were going to do what they did on October the 7th. It is not plausible. This is diversionary tactics by ghastly warmongering men who are only interested in hanging on to power.
Can't stand the way you sit on the fence, Joe. Honestly, I wish you'd give us a straight answer to a straight question. Kevin, what's your take on it?
Well, I wouldn't much disagree with what Joe says. Just on that last point, it does seem incredible to me that they've had pretty good, particularly that first 24 hours. They took out their targets pretty. I'm going to say neatly, that's probably not the word to use, but pretty directly with their targeting. Joe alludes to Mossad agents, etc. So that, I mean, they clearly had people on the inside there for quite a time. If you read some of the stories, they've been ready to do this for 40 years, or they've been wanting to do this for 40 years. And really what's happened is he had the space to do so, didn't he? He made the inroads into Hezbollah and Hamas that we're obviously all aware of, the Houthis, etc. He'd effectively cleared the space. The earlier skirmishes they had a bit earlier on in the year took out some of Iran's air defences. So I think the two things that strike me from, at least from a military point of view, is they seem to be pretty effective at the outset, notwithstanding I accept Joe's point about the 7 October, lack of intelligence around the 7 October Hamas attack, and just how poor the Iranians have been at being able to defend themselves, given the sort of state of the country they are, that they clearly want nuclear weapons, but they're not able to withstand even a pretty sort of straightforward, as it were, military attack from a sort of regional rival. Put that aside, I think the concern is that Trump, I mean, as Joe said, he clearly, you can tell he didn't know much about this. There wasn't really any engagement between him and Netanyahu on this. He may have known it's sort of vaguely coming, but it wasn't a coordinated attack with the Americans. The Americans have sort of come in behind, and of course they're always going to be on the side of the Israelis, not the Iranians. And they'll probably play some kind of role in some of the defences around Israel now. But I think that the big worry is that in the past you would have the powers, be that the US and us and others, the French, etc., the Security Council members, who would rally in some way to try and get some kind of resolution, or at least to get some short-term peace. I'm not sure that's how possible that is. You know, with Trump the way he is, you can't read the man. He's erratic in every sense. Who are the other powers? Who are the other people either in the region or beyond the region who are going to act as mediators or bring the two sort of powers, one already nuclear, one potentially nuclear power, to the table in some degree? I can't see who that is. I don't know how this thing plays out, how it ends, and really in the end what the great result is. They're clearly taking back Iran's attempts to become a nuclear power. They're denting them, knocking years off that potential, but presumably they will try and regroup to some degree, although I agree with Joe, they weren't just about to have a nuclear weapon launched tomorrow or next week. But other than that, what is the end game of all of this? And with the American president, we'll talk about a bit more later, with the American president we have in place, nobody knows how this thing plays out, or that the usual grown-ups are going to bring some kind of order to it. I don't know what's next.
Well,
ironically, of course, ironically, the catalyst for the claimed concerns that Netanyahu and the Israelis have is the fact that Trump ripped up that nuclear deal that had been re-established by the Biden presidency, initially done by Obama, which enabled inspectors to go into Iran on a regular basis to see what they were up to. So, Trump rips that deal up, and 6 months later, the Israelis are bombing buggery out of Iran, saying, they're off developing nuclear weapons. Netanyahu's claimed Iran was developing nuclear weapons, by the way, since 1992. So it's not a new claim that he's made. I do, though, think that we need to take some account of the fact that Israel and Israeli people do see Iran as a major threat, whether that be in the medium to long term. But if you were to say to Israelis, who do you fear most as a regional rival, Iran would be top of the list. So Netanyahu, and perhaps there is some political calculation in this as well, Joe, knows that his activities in Gaza are not being supported by the majority of Israelis. This attack, I think, he will take more credit for from his domestic audience. What's your view on that? But also Kevin's point here, and I think this is the bigger worry for the world, America's now lack of power and influence over these key, very macho players in the world. Even heard over the weekend that Vladimir Putin may be the guy that people turn to do a peace deal between Iran and Israel. For fuck's sake, if Vladimir Putin is the answer, then you've got to wonder what the question is.
Well, yeah, let's bring back Liz Truss to sort out the global economy if you're going down that route. No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think, it's astonishing that Donald Trump, who said he was going to be a dictator from day one and bring peace around the world, has absolutely trashed America's reputation as, on every level. I mean, figures out this morning showing that businesses are very unwilling to do business in America or with America because of the instability. And it's the instability that stems from the top, from the instability and the erratic nature of Trump's decision making. I think, two things. I think, yes, you're absolutely right. This is something that will be seen as popular, or maybe more popular, in Israel by Netanyahu's domestic audience, who he desperately wants to win over. But interestingly, Iranian missiles have managed to get through the Iron Dome, which will then beg questions again about Israel's security. So you can be the strong man, but not if somebody's coming in and actually managed to kill people because your security system doesn't work. I think Kevin's point about the other players is really, really significant as well. And, I would be very interested in looking at where Turkey sits, for instance, geographically, politically, historically, all of those sort of things. And then you've got, Jordan, which manages in the middle of all of this to maintain some degree of neutrality. But, what about the Gulf states? Where do they sit? We've seen oil prices go up. They've stabilised quite a lot over the last couple of days. But obviously, markets will be looking at what happens. And if there is an attack or a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a really significant shipping route, that will have massive global impact on stocks and shares around the world. And just very briefly, you mentioned Putin. Well, we're all looking over there. What do you think Putin's doing? He might be doing a deal with the Iranians, but I bet you he's thinking a bit more about what's going on in Ukraine. Or I rather fancy Belarus or Estonia, and there's China and there's India and Pakistan. I mean, the world is in the worst possible turmoil, run by and large by warmongering idiots. And there doesn't seem to be anybody who's able to bring any of them to bear. And I think your point about, Trump and America losing its place. I mean, clearly Netanyahu doesn't give a damn what Trump thinks. And neither does Putin.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice segue, Joe, into you think we rehearse these podcasts, wouldn't you?
You'd think we were professional
Probably not. Probably
you?
not. Into the state of American politics, because there is, we talked yesterday about soap operas, and there is no bigger soap opera than what goes on in America when Trump is in the White House. And I could give you a list of 10 to 12 things that happened last week, but we haven't got time to discuss them all. But the two things that were significant, obviously that tragic assassination of an American senator, a political assassination. That was Melissa Hartman, Minnesota state representative. in Waltz's state, I believe, the guy who ran for vice presidency alongside Kamala Harris. And then, of course, you had this bizarre day of a military parade, which looked very odd to me. I mean, I've only seen sort of limited highlights of it, but it didn't look like the sort of organised military march that you get in Russia or Korea, one of those places. It looked a little bit shit, if I can use a technical term. And on the same day, you had these masses and masses of demonstrations across the whole of the United States, which was called No King's Day. People saying that Trump was trying to become a dictator, and there were, as I say, literally thousands of people out on the streets protesting against him. This, of course, a week after Trump had a massive fallout with Governor Newsom over sending state troops into LA. So it's all kicking off, Kevin, and people are on the streets, not necessarily for the right reasons, but at least Trump got his military parade, hey?
He got his birthday day parade, which I thought was interesting. He had his, what we all know was his birthday parade, not really the 250th anniversary of the US Army. That was the catalyst for that shit show, as you might call it, Frank. Was on the same day as we had Troop in the Colour, which is partly a celebration of our monarch's official, not his actual, but his official birthday. I don't think there were too many protesters, probably a few from the Republic movement, but not too many protesters on the streets of London while Troop in the Colour was pulled off in its usual with degree of perfection. And of course, that's what Trump wants. He wants sort of Troop in the Colour, he wants all that sort of pageantry, and he wants the kind of military parades that he's seen other countries have, or when he's been to France and he's seen Russian and Chinese ones on the telly, etc., Korean ones. He wants all these big sort of, nukes rolling down the road, paying tribute to him, doesn't he? That's what it was all about. He's trying to set the sort of path that to become the norm. And it was a bit odd. It was more like a jamboree, really, rather than a sort of military parade. I thought from the bits that I saw. I will just say now that, if I ever get to some kind of position where it warrants it, I'll have a military parade. I mean, they sound like a good idea to me. I'd like a military parade with everyone saluting me. But no, I mean, it was dreadful, wasn't it? In every, I mean, 50 million, I think, was the estimate for the cost on it. I mean, really, with everything else going on with it, it's pulling, US aid, etc., and all kinds of other things going on in the name of Dodge, and he's spending this on a, ego trip. It's appalling. It's all appalling. I think the thing that, does come up, but does really trouble me is, with all that's going on, and him not being able to solve wars in 24 hours, but actually he's making the wars worse, his third term. I am absolutely convinced this guy is going to try and find some way of running either into an election for a third term, or being able to create a situation where an election is not needed at the end of his term because of some, national / global security crisis. And alongside that, I don't know what the chances of that. I'm not saying they're high or even above evens, but this is more than a passing thought in his head, isn't it? And I'm damn sure there are people in his administration are working out what is the possible path to that, because you can't see this guy leaving now, can you, in any other way other than in a wooden box. And alongside that, notwithstanding the terrible assassination, obviously, where are the Democrats? I follow American politics a little, not obsessively, but a little. Even if you can't find any Obama or any Clinton, but how are the Democrats taking the fight? How are they bringing accountability and scrutiny to this president? We've got a different system, of course, in America to ours, but where is the accountability, scrutiny and challenge coming to this president, either from the media and in particular from Democrats or other political actors? They're the two things that really worry me, is how long this guy's actually going to be in the Oval Office causing havoc, and where the Democrats either to challenge him or to become his successor.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you make there, Kevin, in terms of the almost rehearsal for him declaring a national emergency, never mind in 3 years' time when he supposedly leaves office because he's done his 2 terms as president. But I'm with you, he's going to try and find any which way he can to stay at the White House. But it's the midterms. And again, I've heard an awful lot of political commentators from the States saying that they wouldn't be a bit surprised if he sent state troops into those states where he thought there was a likelihood of a Democrat winning a seat. And that's, it's frightening, isn't it, that we're talking about the United States of America in this way, Joe? And then I know that in the UK, we've had our issues in terms of 2 MPs assassinated, if I can use that word. So it's not unusual in that sense, but it does strike me that there is a undercurrent now in America where you've got, a governor of a major state saying, we feel as though we're under attack here. It's tantamount to bordering on civil war.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, don't forget the Minnesota lawmaker was in her own home. This wasn't a constituency surgery. This wasn't a public event.
That's a great point.
It's somebody going to her house. And, you're absolutely right, Frank. We know the appalling abuse that politicians from every single political colour get around the world. And it's awful, and the threats and everything else. But this is somebody going into, they've now arrested the suspect, so who knows, but yes, it is appalling, and I think this is going to come down to, I get the impression, and it's really difficult, as Kevin rightly said, we sort of sit far away, we only see a sort of a bird's eye view of it, and I completely agree with Kevin about, where is the voice of opposition apart from Gavin Newsom, and it might have done him the world of good, the Democratic governor of California, who's said, hang on a minute, we don't need your bloody state troops here. But other than that, where do you hear the voice of opposition? And of course, you have got, although, we criticise the BBC, there is nothing like the BBC. Every media outlet in the States is partisan. You've got now the battle lines really are drawn between the Trump administration and the judiciary. And he will use whatever means he's got, legally or otherwise, to overturn and threaten anyone who goes against him. Now, we saw that at the weekend that California said, we don't need the state troops. The court said, well, actually, you're quite right. Trump's overstepped his powers. Trump immediately, filed an appeal. So that's going on. But, unless you have a judiciary that is strong enough to say to the president, no, you can't do this, and because of who he is and how he works, he will say to his supporters, we've got to take down the judiciary. And where does that lead? In a country where you can go and buy a gun as easily as a packet of chewing gum, and where people are rampant social media and politics is so divisive, it's absolutely terrifying. And I think, that's, I know many Americans, obviously they're sort of, liberal Democrats minded Americans who are embarrassed, rather like we have been over Brexit, that they sort of want to say, I didn't vote for him, I'm not like those people, but they are actually in the minority. And one is seeing, whether it's apocryphal or whether it's real, increasing stories of academics, scientists, researchers, creatives leaving the States, whether they're coming to Europe or they're going to Canada, because they are frightened. Now, I'm sorry, I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is echoes of the 1930s. And what happens next is very much down to the American people. Are they going to say enough is enough, or are we going to have a bloodbath? Because I don't think we're far from it.
Very worrying, and people might think we're sounding alarmist, but as Kevin said, he's publicly stated that he wants to run for a third term. Doesn't see why he shouldn't, which would be unprecedented. And then you see, don't you, almost on a daily basis now, unlike during his first term, you simply don't have, Kevin, those calmer, more experienced, pragmatic, mainstream voices around him saying, whoa, hold on, Mr. President, no, you can't do that. In fact, I think that what you've got is people around him pushing the envelope as far as they possibly can and taking Trump with them.
I think that's right. Yeah, he's got a very different administration. He doesn't have sort of people have been in the Republican movement in and out of government for years and decades. He's got sort of his own people, as it were, who were all slightly mad and sort of ideologues of one sort or another, who are not, keeping the guardrails there that an American president or any other system would normally have. I just want to pick up one other point that Joe mentioned about the judiciary, and if I may just bring it back to the UK to a degree, because I think one of the things that has come out of the American political activities and system of the last few years is division, and we've got more and more division in this country. There's sort of a more colourful division. There's always been divides, of course, between left and right, but the division is, earthier and more distasteful and less respectful than it's ever been.
Yeah.
I think the other export that's coming from America, if I can put it that way, is the relationship between elected politicians and the public with their attacks on the judiciary.
Yeah.
And the kind of the voices and the level of debate that goes on about whatever, sentence has been passed or judgment has been given by judges in this country, and the kind of kick-off that takes place that 20 years isn't long enough or whatever it is, etc. And I think, that's some people listening to this podcast may say, well, I'm not really interested in US politics, and Trump's a nutter or whatever, will be gone in 3 years, what do I care? But one of the reasons I'd say that people do need to take a close interest in what's happening in this America is that, as we know, on technology and business, but certainly in politics, it exports a lot of trends across the Atlantic. And I do think the trend of the attacks on the judiciary, including coming from elected and other political actors, is something that we should worry about. I'm thinking particularly about, headlines that were going on when there was reviews around Brexit and Supreme Court hearings and so on, and front pages on the Daily Mail. This is getting worse, and we should pay heed to that. And also, as you allude to, Frank, this idea that if you don't like what a politician says, you go and shoot them, be it in a constituency surgery, in a constituency event, or even worse, as if they're not bad enough, in their own home. We've got to pay attention to these things, because I'm afraid they're being exported across the Atlantic.
Yes, and it's not getting any better. I can't see the Trump regime doing anything other than putting the foot on the accelerator of this chaos, because they thrive on that. We were talking yesterday about the UK electorate increasingly seeming to want drama in the politics. Well, they're getting it in spades in the States. And you're right, Kevin, we do import an awful lot of the stuff that goes on over there, don't we? You think back to Clinton, the New Democrats and New Labour. It's not new that we have those sort of conversations taking place across the pond. Reagan and Thatcher were obviously very close as well. And Trump will basically say, well, he is similar to the Yanks voting for Brexit. They're basically opting to leave the rest of the world, aren't they? That's what America have done in terms of electing Donald Trump to the presidency. But listen, the orange one will be heading to Canada along with other world leaders this week for the G7. And that is going to be an interesting conversation, is it not? What are they going to do to make sure that Donald stays in the room? He famously walked out the last time he was at a G7 summit in Canada. And it's that famous photograph, if you remember, guys, with Merkel sort of leaning over and pointing a finger at him, saying, "Hey, you tosser, get in line." But at that time, as I have just referenced, he had people around him who would join Angela Merkel's pleadings for saying, let's be reasonable, Donald. He's not got that this time. And so when you think about the agenda, Mark Carney will be pulling his hair out that the Israel-Iran thing has broken out just before he's welcoming all these world leaders to Canada, because he will have had other things on his mind. Of course, Ukraine was already going to be on the agenda. They are then looking at cyber security. Be interested to know what Donald Trump's views on that are these days. Maybe he's a little more in favour of regulation, given his recent fallout with Musk, but we will wait and see. And of course, I'm sure one of the big things that they will want to discuss with Donald Trump is tariffs and world trade. So a big agenda in front of them at the G7. Do these things make much difference, Joe, particularly when you've got somebody like Trump in the room who could agree to almost everything on the agenda today, but then tomorrow rip it all up anyway?
I think, like all these things, and it's probably, the same as all the excellent networking events that Downtown runs, Frank, a lot of this is not what happens there in front of the cameras, it's about what happens behind the scenes. And the other members who will be there, well, we know Mark Carney, we know Keir Starmer and Mark Carney have obviously got a very good relationship, but Japan, where do they sit on all of this? Because they have been very vocal in their opposition to what Israel's done, with a preemptive strike on Iran. Now, they're a significant player too. So I think a lot of this is about, they're expensive. There's lots of paper. There's lots of meetings. There's endless bottled water, in single-use plastics and all of that shit, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure most of the leaders are probably either thinking, thank God I'm not at home dealing with that. Angela can deal with it, or Rachel can do it. Or they might be thinking, oh God, not another one of these meetings. I really need to get back and concentrate on X, Y, or Z. So I think, they're a pain in many, many ways. But I think, as we've just discussed in today's podcast, the world is in such flux that we actually need these groups of people. And don't forget, the G7 and the G8, they have managed to do things together. Sadly, everybody's turned their back on fighting world poverty and cutting debt and all of those sorts of things. But don't forget, that came out of, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and hosting it in Scotland, all of those sort of things. And I think in terms of trade, well, Trump's going to do tariffs here, tariffs there, no tariffs, yes tariffs, all of that stuff. So actually, in a way, it's more important that the other countries bond together if they need to ignore Trump, who knows what he's going to do between now and breakfast time.
Yeah, and I suppose that the other thing that you could say, Kevin, is because the United States is such an unstable place at this moment in time. The president is unpredictable, and we spoke earlier about the waning influence over world events, partially as a result of Donald Trump's presidency, but also I think because the likes of China, India have emerged as big economies and continue to grow and challenge that American dominance of economic activity, at least. Those other leaders, Carney, Starmer, Macron, Joe's mentioned the Japanese, will perhaps see this as an opportunity of saying, okay, we've got a problem with that guy, but how can we work around him?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is that it's always better to talk, isn't it? And Joe might have a problem with the amount of bottled water that's on display, or possibly about the amount of jet fuel that is burned to get all these people there. But notwithstanding that, I do think talking is good. It's better than having wars, isn't it? Be they trade wars or military wars. And it's probably a very good thing for them to be in the same room. Notwithstanding, I also agree with you. It's Joe. It's the sidebars. It's the bilaterals, which will be as important, if not more important, than the times where they're sitting around some very elaborate circular table. So I think it's good that they're together, that they're talking. I think, to be fair, to go against the grain of some, I think Starmer's handling his relationship with Trump as well as anybody possibly humanly could. Carney, I thought Carney was brilliant with him when he was in the Oval Office with him, because those Oval Office routines now are, after seeing what happened to Ukraine, you must go into those Oval Office sessions thinking it's all just going to be a lovely handshake and you're going to swap some gifts and smile, and suddenly they're now a major ordeal, and you wonder where not just the president but JD Vance is going to come at you from. So I think Carney dealt with that very well. The whole kind of we're not for sale, Mr. President. I've talked to our shareholders recently. I thought so. All of them, Macron is pretty good with him. The German Chancellor was in there, I think, last week or the week before. So actually, they can coordinate a little bit together. And now you got to be careful not to gang up on Trump, because he'll walk again, as you say, Frank, like he did last time, or he'll agree to everything, get on the plane, and then scribble it all out. So I think that's a good thing. Be that around Israel, Iran, be it around Ukraine, or around trade and tariffs, etc. And you're right, Joe. I was going to bring up exactly the same example. I think in Glen Eagles, wasn't it, of debt relief coming out of the G7. It's not the same thing, but it's kind of a G7 plus. Gordon Brown used the G20 very effectively in the financial crash, etc. So there will be lots of people who say, well, this is just another jamboree, and people drinking expensive bottled water and meals and etc. But actually, we should probably have more of these, not less.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll wait and see what the outcome is of those discussions. There couldn't be any more going on for them to discuss, and hopefully some positives will come out of this week's G7. Listen, guys, it's been great to have your company again today, and nice seeing you. We will be back, of course, next Monday. Hopefully Jim has been plugged in for the week by then, and his AI holograph will be back with us. But if not, I'm sure Kevin will rejoin us and give us his wisdom of all things politics. Kevin, I think I'm seeing you next week.
Looking forward to it.
Going to do an event in Birmingham with Simon Lawrence, who is the newly appointed head of regeneration at Birmingham City Council. And Joe, I'm seeing you tomorrow in Parliament, because we are hosting our Liverpool parliamentary reception, of course.
Absolutely. I will look forward to it. Nothing like a little drink on the terrace.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a bit of water, darling. The sparkly stuff. And it won't be water, it will be the old Prosecco. And our producer today, Francesca King, watch her, Joe. Honestly. Yeah. She's a bloody monster on the air. She's a monster on the air. Right, great to be with you again. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you back in the Downtown Den Politics podcast next Monday.